I think the best advice that I have had and that I've taken in the last several years, and particularly around the breast cancer stuff, is not everybody needs to know everything.
Mm,
You're entitled to your privacy when it comes to challenges. It's important to tell people what's okay and what's not okay and enforce that because people will rise to the level of your boundaries. And if you don't have them, you'll be awash in other people's energy. So I think that it's important for you to take a moment and ask yourself, what is it that I need here in this moment? And am I willing to give that to myself? And if I don't have the energy or strength to, who can I ask to support me in it so that you don't have to be alone?
mm, that is beautiful. That is so beautiful. And hi, I'm Biz Cush, a life coach and therapist, and your host here on the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast. We're talking to women all over the world who found their way back to themselves, to their inner knowing, to their intuition, to their wisest self. We're exploring how to feel alive, authentic, engaged, and fully present in your life. Let's awaken your wise woman. Hey there, we are back with another inspiring and information-filled podcast this week. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to say happy spring here in Maryland. That has been a slow coming event. Lots of cold weather, and I just can't wait for warmth and more sunshine. I don't know about you, but I love winter and I'm ready for spring. By the time it comes around, I am so ready for something different. And that's why I love living on the East Coast where I get to experience all the seasons. So here we are. I'm Biz Cush. Forgot to introduce myself. I am Biz Cush, and this is my podcast. And again, I'm super excited to have Nicole Lewis Keeber here on the podcast today. But before we get into that interview, I just wanted to share that I have coaching spots available. My schedule has opened up and I have spots available for coaching with me. And through my Shine Your Light Brightly coaching program, we explore your values, your energy. So, how in touch with your self energy you are, as well as the energetic flow. So, how balanced you're feeling, how much of your energy is going towards the things that really fill you up versus the things that drain you. We'll tap into your intuition because it's there. Sometimes we lose track of it, but we all have intuition. And your alignment. So, how aligned you feel in your life choices, in your business, in your life itself is really important in helping you feel centered and grounded and empowered. So if this sounds good to you, especially if you are a highly sensitive woman, because I know what a challenge that can be not to feel overwhelmed and stressed all the time. And I want that for you. I want that for you. So if this sounds good to you, if you want to know more about coaching with me, you can sign up for a free 45-minute discovery call where we explore whether life coaching with me works for you. You can do that through my website. There's multiple buttons to click to schedule that 45-minute free call. I look forward to chatting with you to see if this is the right fit for you. So go to elizabethcushcoaching.com, click on the schedule a chat with me, and I can't wait to talk to you. So on to today's interview. We've got Nicole Lewis Keeber, and just such an enlightening conversation for me personally, being a trauma survivor, which most of you, many of you as listeners of the podcast here know. And she really has brought to light in her business that as trauma survivors, if we're entrepreneurs in particular, we may be bringing those trauma patterns into our businesses, into our business mindset, and how we relate to our business. And the thing that really struck me was how she shaped the conversation around you are in relationship to your business. Like this is a relationship. You work with it every day and you feel things about it every day. And if you have trauma, you might be repeating those trauma patterns in your business, on your business, with your business. So here's a little bit more about Nicole, and then we'll jump into our conversation. Nicole Lewis Keeber is the business therapist, author of How to Love Your Business, and creator of the Do No Harm program for trauma-conscious entrepreneurs. She's passionate about the impact of small t trauma on businesses and combines therapeutic processes with business coaching to help entrepreneurs build emotionally sustainable, financially stable businesses. Nicole has a rich and varied experience as a therapist. She's trained and certified with Brené Brown's Dare to Lead methodology and has also been featured on numerous media outlets, including Fast Company and NPR, for her work in breaking the stigma of mental health and business ownership. Let's jump into this conversation with Nicole. Hi, Nicole. Welcome to the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk to you. This is the best part of my job, is even though I don't get paid for this part. But I do love interviewing other women and getting to know them. But for others out there in the world who don't know who you are, could you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Nicole Lewis Keeber. I have a master's degree in social work. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. However, I'm not from here. As you get to talk to me, you'll hear that I have a little bit of a Southern accent remaining from growing up in North Carolina. I live here in Lancaster with my husband and our two cats, which you probably will hear in the background. The door's shut, but you know how cats are. So
I do.
if you hear some meowing in the background, that's them, griping about the fact that I have now shut them out of their favorite spot to
I
be.
totally get it. You may hear my dog bark in the background too. So there you go. Being an animal lover.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really honestly, when I always get asked this question, I'm like, oh, I don't know what to say. But I think the most important thing to share is that I'm 51. I'm from that Gen X generation.
Mm,
And, so much of the experiences that I had growing up led me to have this desire to understand people's behavior for many reasons.
yeah.
And I think that that's one of the reasons why I chose the therapy world to step into as a career, and what has led me through that career to where I am now, which is being a coach for small business owners and entrepreneurs, and someone who is on the forefront of exploring how trauma impacts entrepreneurship. And so much of that journey has come from learning to listen to myself and not what other people are telling me that I can and should do, which was a
Mm,
skill that I learned from being a kid and growing up who had a learning disability back in the day when no one really tested for that or provided any assistance. So from this really big challenge I had growing up and feeling like I had no idea what was going on most of the time, I learned to work my way around it and to find the thing that works for me and to
mm.
trust my own inner knowledge. And I think that that's just been something that has served me my whole life through all of the ups and downs in the roller coaster.
Yeah. Well, and it's not always easy to when there are people telling you what you should and shouldn't do. And if there's your own trauma potentially in your childhood, like I'm speaking from personal experience,
Mhm.
just that I lost faith in the ability to trust myself because everybody was telling me what I was feeling, what I was experiencing, like I should just ignore that and just get over your anxiety, move
Mhm.
on, don't think about it, just buck up, soldier through. And
took me a long time to come back to that. I'm curious if
Yeah.
there was some work that helped you get to that place where you learned that you really did know what was best for you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, same. I thought that my way of doing things was the wrong way, but it was the only way I could get it done. It was the only way it worked for me. And it's taken a long time to unpack that shame around being different. And even though I was getting an outcome that I needed to survive and get through, I was being told it wasn't done the right way, or my thoughts about it weren't right, or the way I was approaching things didn't fit. And so rather than me seeing the world as being unable to acknowledge and honor my way of being in the world, I internalized it and believed that there was something wrong with me.
Mm,
And it's taken years of therapy and coaching and personal development books and
yeah,
failed marriages, honestly, to get to a place where I recognize, and this is what I do in my work now with my own self, is that it what works for you, and it's really no one else's place to tell you that that is not the right way, for you,
yeah,
because you know what you need. Like no one knows you better. You know what you need.
yeah,
That's been a
yeah,
while coming.
yeah. So likewise, yeah. Lots of therapy, lots of coaching, just inner work. You shared with me that your inner child wisdom guided you in your life choices and decisions. And I'm curious about, I love the phrase inner child wisdom because we often talk about childhood parts as sort of, I don't know, not necessarily being bad, but not necessarily having wisdom, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah, it took a little bit of time to understand it that way because as I've done being in therapy and being as a therapist for many years, is that kind of have to work on reparenting ourselves and retrieving those younger versions of ourselves that get stuck in those traumatic experiences that we have. So we have all these different versions of our younger selves that are kind of frozen in time at that experience that we had where we felt less than, misunderstood, or harmed, or
Unseen. Yeah, yeah,
unseen, unsafe,
yeah,
whatever.
yes.
And for such a long time, the only voice, my only inner kiddo voice, what I call them, was one of fear and anxiety and worry. And what that did for me is it developed a really loud inner critic. And what I used to think was, okay, so I have this critical voice. I need to shut it down. I need to kind of kill it, slay it, all the things that you hear. And what I recognize is that that inner critic of mine is actually there for a reason. It's a protector of the younger versions of me, and that there's wisdom in those younger versions of me about what it is I need to pay attention to or heal or recognize in this moment, in this trigger. And so I have
Hmm.
learned to recognize that inner critic and pause and say, okay, what's going on? What do you need? And it's often the voice of a younger kiddo version of me that has some need. And
Yeah.
when I can meet that need as opposed to shutting down the critic, it's such a valuable experience. And that's why I call it that wisdom, because that kiddo is just like, okay, hey, I'm over here. Like there's some stuff over here that needs to be healed. Or, you're about to jump on a stage doing a keynote in front of 300 people. And I did not approve of this. I didn't approve of this thing that you were about to do, lady. So we need to have a conversation. And so I think that that's been a journey for me and really understanding that there's wisdom in those moments. And now granted, I don't want my critic to direct me and beat me down. I think that that's some of the language that we hear from our culture and the people around us, that critic takes on the voice of those people. But
Mm,
in the end, the whole purpose of it is to keep us safe and to protect those parts of us that have not felt safe. So that's where the wisdom has come from. And it's still here, almost every day. There's some wisdom gained from a moment of that critic popping up or a trigger that comes up for me. And I'm like, okay, so somebody's not happy with what we're doing in the business today. Like, let's take a breath. Who needs to be excused from the boardroom to go play
exactly.
or whatever? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, just as you described your part saying, like, nobody told me we were going to be standing up in front of all these people. Well, those parts don't have to be there, right? Like we can give them permission to go. Something else that came up while you were talking for me was that often, at least in my personal experience, that the triggers can be around relational issues too, where there's the critic saying either I'm not doing it, I'm not doing the right things in relationships, or there's something wrong with me because people aren't seeing me for who I am, versus those younger parts really needing to be tended to, and that they're sharing like maybe this relationship doesn't feel safe.
Hmm.
Yeah, and isn't healthy.
And they're wise.
Yes.
There's good experience there. I was literally talking to a client a couple of weeks ago about those inner kiddos, and she's like, "Well, why do we keep doing the same thing over and over? Like, why with relationship?" Or this was a business conversation. She's like, "Why do I keep feeling this way? Why do I keep feeling like this pattern is being reenacted?" And I said, a lot of times what happens with these younger versions of ourselves is like we are behaving in the same way because it's almost like you want a new ending to the script or the movie. We're going to play it all out again, hoping for the ending that we should have had the first time. Right.
Yep.
But all the
Yep.
players are still the same. So unfortunately, often we end up with the same scenario.
Yeah.
And she was like, "Yeah, that makes a lot of sense," because she's like, "I want a different outcome, but I'm recognizing that I'm trying to get a different ending, but all the players I brought into the situation are the same people playing the same roles." So,
Yeah. Well, I think it's so interesting. I am very much involved in sort of trauma circles and trauma healing through different types of therapies and groups and things like that. But I really haven't heard a lot about like bringing the awareness of trauma into the business world, which makes so much sense. I mean, you think about the interpersonal dynamics that go on, and whether it's a large company or a small company or whatever it might be, even just being a solo entrepreneur, me personally, all my trauma triggers that get around money or whatever it might be that
mhm.
are popping up, that what prompted you to shift from being a therapist to this line of work where you're kind of helping business owners
Yeah.
look more clearly at that?
It wasn't a direct line, but it was pretty interesting in that I left the world of being a therapist. My last quote unquote job was as a clinical supervisor in a methadone clinic here locally. So it was a very stressful job.
Oh my gosh.
I had 12 counselors under me, a staff of 20, and we had, I think, about 380 patients as well. So
Wow.
it was a very, very stressful job. And I was having a lot of physical symptoms because I was burnt out. And I don't know about you in your training, I was never taught how to take care of myself. It was a foregone conclusion that you will always put your clients first, and
Yep.
burnout, what's that, right? So,
Well, and so many of like the situations you're describing, like with community mental health, is the expectation is you work it like a full-time job,
mhm,
40 clients, 40
mhm.
hours. And oh, I interned in a place like that, and it was very difficult on my
Yeah.
system. But anyway, you
And it,
finish what
it
you're saying.
totally
Sorry.
is. And so as many people who are in that field or as helpers or therapists, I ended up having physical issues that were in nature because of the emotional and energetic misalignment.
Mhm.
And I left and I started trying to figure out, okay, well, what can I do? I really want to still work with people, but I need a minute. I need to get myself together. So I did, and I started working with a life coach because I had been in therapy. I was a therapist for 18 years, and I had a small private practice as well. I had done therapy, and I just felt like there was something else I would like to do. And so I
Mhm.
worked with a life coach who had trained with Martha Beck, who's like one of the grandmothers of life coaching. And I really enjoyed it, and I got a lot of benefit out of it. And so I thought, well, maybe this is something that I could do where I could continue to work with people because this is what I love to do, but in a different way. And so I went and got trained in the first coaching program that came across my desk, and it was for money mindset. And I thought, well, this is an area I need some help into. And I got trained to be a money mindset coach. And that's how I started my business, was helping people recognize how they could change their paradigm around money. And as someone who grew up in the household than I did. And as a social worker, because I have a master's in social work, I was very much taught to default into a certain number that I could make in my career. I was like, you're going to make this much and that's it. So it never occurred to me to even negotiate a salary. So
Yeah.
it was super helpful for me to go through it myself. But what I began to recognize is with the clients I was working with, which were mostly small business owners and entrepreneurs, is that they didn't actually have a mindset issue around money. They actually had trauma connected to their money. And so I
Mm.
started to explore, this idea of money trauma, which I didn't come up with that, Margaret Lynch, I think, did, or maybe someone else, but started to explore this idea of money trauma that happened in your formative years and how it impacts what you feel you deserve, or how money can then be really uncomfortable. It doesn't matter how much money you have, less or more, the relationship that we have with it becomes very complicated and can feel very untenable. And so as I was doing that work, I began to see it wasn't just money that my clients were struggling with when it came to trauma in their
Mhm.
business. And about 2 years into my own business, which I write about in my book, How to Love Your Business, I recognized that I was very getting burnt out again, and I was very unhappy, starting to dread my work. And I was, sat down and I was thinking about, okay, so if I'm miserable here and I'm feeling really kind of like nothing I do is good enough and I'm feeling beat up, I'm the person who created this business. It was me. Like there's nobody else here. So if I'm feeling this way, why do I feel this way? And I did some more deep dives into recognizing that I had created a relationship with my business, because I believe that when you start a business, you enter into a relationship, and that I was recreating those trauma patterns and those roles from my relationship with my parents, and particularly my mom, in my
Mm.
business. And that my business was pretty much a stand-in for my mom at this point, that I could do no right, everything was wrong. And then when I realized, I was like, wow, okay. So I
Yeah.
am recreating trauma patterns in my business, with my business then being this perpetrator, really, in some way. I had set it up to put myself in a victim spot. And so
Right.
I started doing more research and having more conversations with my clients. And I did all these research and interviews with small business owners to kind of dig into how does trauma impact the business. And it makes so much sense, because starting a business is a high dive into personal development, whether you want it to be or not. It just brings up everything.
Everything.
But we are so taught to compartmentalize our lives. Like you leave your life at the door when you go into your work. And that's not
Mhm.
true. Our motivation to be a business owner and to be entrepreneurial is often connected to a trauma story from our past. It is often the motivator. It
Right.
affects the relationship we build with our business. It affects how we work with our clients and employees and the relationships that we build there, and how all of those triggers can come up in navigating your business, even as solopreneurs, because your business is something outside of you that you
Yeah.
are relating to. So it's been
Yeah.
a very interesting journey. It's a long answer to get to
Yeah.
this place. And I started looking around to see if anyone else was doing research on this topic or writing books about it. And this was 6 years ago at this point, nothing.
Mm.
So I started doing some of it myself.
Wow. Wow. And such an interesting, because of course, right? Like you said, we do have, especially as entrepreneurs, but even if you were just showing up to your work every day, you have a relationship with the work that you do, and you,
Hmm.
whether you choose your work or you just are showing up because this is where you have to go every day. But yeah, there is some relationship to how you feel about it, how you approach it. Just you talking about money trauma, I've talked about it here on the podcast. I definitely have a somewhat dysfunctional relationship with money that I am continuing to work on.
Hmm.
But yeah, so much of the past stuff comes up when dealing with thinking about the money, but also thinking about my business and me as a business owner.
Hmm.
And yeah, oof, makes so much sense.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I mean, there's nothing more motivating to be an entrepreneur or a small business owner than childhood trauma. I mean, I laugh at it, but it's almost like a boot camp for it. So you get all these amazing skill sets, but you're triggered all the time. So yeah, but it's amazing, the high percentage of people that I've interviewed or worked with who are entrepreneurial that are that way because of either some example, some experience that they had that said, I never want to be like that person, or I'll show you, or I'm always going to be in control. Like there's something that happened that made them want to be the one in control and in charge. And
Yeah.
also, they developed a lot of skills for managing long periods of discomfort and having to be the one to do the thing themselves because there's no one else there to do it. So,
Mm,
and that's what's so beautiful about it, actually, is that you can have a really loving relationship with your business and a wonderful experience as a business owner and entrepreneur when you really start to understand that you have a choice here and you can learn to do no harm to yourself with your business and that there is an option there. And yeah, you
yeah.
don't have to suffer through it.
Right. This doesn't have to be a re-traumatizing experience every time you approach your business.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say for sure, being a business owner has taught me a lot about my need to just feel like I'm always doing something new. Like, what's the next thing? What am I going to put out there into the world? And yeah, took me to the point where I was like, I can't sustain this. Like, I can't be the only person doing my business. And so I've reached out and have help in other ways, but also scaled back, which is important. And so, what was the transition like for you? You said it was like 6 years ago. So, not at the very beginning of your career, you're turning things around and doing things very differently. What was that like for you as a person? What was that like to make those decisions and changes and to walk away from a job you've been doing for a long time?
It was difficult. I think the fact that I wasn't well helped because I was very clear that the systems around us in service and helping professions relies on us being of service, and I'm air quoting here, when it's really work
Hmm.
for labor for no money. But we've
Right.
been kind of sold this idea that you're doing good for the world and you're being of service and that that should be enough for you and that your needs actually shouldn't be met and that you should want for nothing and that money's not important. It shouldn't be important to you. And so when I started to really recognize that I was burnt out for reasons beyond me at that point, because at first initially I thought, well, this is my fault. I should have done better. I should have had better boundaries. I should have.
Yeah.
But as I kind of unpacked it, I learned to have a healthy dose of self compassion for myself because the system was not set up for me to thrive. It was barely set up for me to survive in that situation.
Yeah.
But it was difficult to walk away from it because it was my identity. There's no secret. I went into being a therapist because I had a very traumatic childhood. I needed to understand why people did what they did and how relationships
Hmm.
work and why do I feel depressed all the time? If there was a very deep motivator to be a therapist.
Yes.
And so walking
Yes.
away from that was a challenge. And then not only that, but moving into this realm of coaching, which my therapist friends had a great disdain for and had no trust in and thought it was very unethical. And the coaching industry is the wild, wild west. There's people doing really awful things in it, and there's people who are doing good work in it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I got a lot of pushback from my therapist friends about what I was doing.
Mm.
I really had to learn to advocate for myself. And I felt very alone a lot of the time because my therapist friends didn't want to talk about my new venture. I think it was kind of
Mm.
like the crab in the bucket thing where the crab's trying to crawl out and the other crabs are trying to pull it back in. There's some
Mm.
innate, I don't know if it's jealousy. It's just like we don't understand, right? Like we're trying to pull you back over here.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't leave the
Don't
fold.
leave the
Stay with
fold. How
us.
could you possibly do good work and not be a therapist? And also a lot of the
Yeah.
coaches that I met as I started to get into the coaching world were very suspect, I think, because I was a therapist and they didn't think that the two could marry.
Hmm.
So,
Interesting because they're so interrelated. I find with my coaching clients and my therapy clients that they're so you pull from all the things
mhm,
for both sets of clients.
yeah, yeah, I agree. But yeah, it wasn't about me. It was about them and how they saw themselves and their own expertise, their own training. And so I felt very alone
Mm.
for quite a while until I ended up in a business coaching program where the business coach was really really great and I found some like-minded people, but it took a minute and I felt kind of alone. My husband initially, when I first started doing this and started my job or my business, he's like, this whole coaching thing. He's like, is it a cult? I started laughing and I was like, no. I said, I know it can feel like it because you go to like this 3-day event and it's like you get all hyped up and excited because you just learned a new coaching tool or
Yeah.
whatever. But even he was a little concerned at the beginning. So I did feel quite alone. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was really quick to jump to train with Brene Brown
Mm,
because she was a trailblazer. She was someone who was talking about shame and vulnerability and refused to not use the word shame when she was giving talks and going before all these corporate CEOs and or women's groups. And they said, yeah, could you not use the word shame? And she's like, no, we have to talk about, you have to use the word. That's what it is. And
right.
that's what I was feeling about when I started talking about trauma in business. People were like, you can't talk about trauma in business. That's not, first of all, that's not a thing. And secondly, don't use the T word. You'll scare people. And and I kept saying, call it burnout,
Yep.
call it. And I was like, no, we have to call a thing a thing. We have to use the appropriate language because that's what's going on here. So I
Yeah.
kind of had to forge this path with a lot of resistance from therapists saying you shouldn't be doing trauma work with coaching clients. I'm like, that's not necessarily what we're doing. And coaches saying you can't talk about trauma, like it's again more resistance. And
Hmm.
so I just really leaned into her mentorship of do it anyway. It's called a thing a
Mm,
thing. People will start to budge at some point. And how here we are now with people using the word shame and vulnerability, looking at shame
right.
in the workplace. And people are starting to come
Yeah.
around to trauma in business. If you go on Instagram for 5 seconds, you're going to see people talking about trauma, business coaches talking about trauma. So
Yeah.
her work was very aligned with my work. And so that's why I jumped at the chance to train with her to learn how to facilitate her dare to lead processes because I felt like they were very aligned with the work that I do and give some tangible skills and tools that are based on research that I don't quite have because it's just me. So still trying to do
Right.
this work on research. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But having that foundation to pull from to really help your clients.
Yes. And so I have felt less alone, but it was really hard for a while. But again, I think that's one of those unseen benefits of being a kid going through a school system with a learning difference without it being diagnosed or supported in any way. You can be lonely and still find your way through.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. And I feel like that's such a beautiful message too, because there are other people out there that have experienced at least somewhat similar things too, to know that yes, you can forge your way through and it's going to be hard, but there is another side. There is the other
Mhm.
side. Uh, so, and you may end up saying the same thing, or you may come up with something else. But you've overcome a lot of in your life.
Mhm.
I mean, I know you're a cancer
Mhm.
survivor, child
Mhm.
abuse, learning disabilities. If there were a piece of wisdom that you would like to share with wise women who are listening to our conversation, what might that be?
I think the best advice that I have had and that I've taken in the last several years, and particularly around the breast cancer stuff, is not everybody needs to know everything.
Mm,
You're entitled to your privacy when it comes to challenges. It's important to tell people what's okay and what's not okay and enforce that because people will rise to the level of your boundaries. And if you don't have them, you'll be awash in other people's energy. So I think that it's important for you to take a moment and ask yourself, what is it that I need here in this moment? And am I willing to give that to myself? And if I don't have the energy or strength to, who can I ask to support me in it so that you don't have to be alone?
mm, that is beautiful. That is so beautiful. And well, I appreciate your wisdom and sharing so much of yourself here today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been nice to talk to you.
Yeah, been really nice to talk to you too. Nice to get to know you. So, Nicole, if people wanted to know more about you and how to find you, where would they look?
Yeah, the best place to go is my website, nicole.lewis.com. nicole-keeber.com. You can find me there. You can also find me on Instagram at nicole.lewiskeeber. I think they're together. I am on TikTok too. I'm playing with the young kids here on TikTok, and I'm at the business therapist on TikTok.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I will certainly include the links to your book and to your social media stuff and your website in the show notes. And I just want to say thanks again for coming on the podcast.
I really enjoyed my conversation with Nicole Lewis Keeber. She is such an easy person to talk to, and I felt like her energy and mine were really very aligned. Part of that was just knowing that she also had a trauma history that she was very willing to share, not the specifics necessarily, but just that it's impacted her life. And I think my biggest takeaway from our conversation today was, I was sharing with her at the end of after I'd stopped recording, was that I really, even though I've considered how trauma has impacted my relationships with others and my relationship with myself, my relationship with money, I really have not thought about, this is a little embarrassing to say, but it's true. I've not thought about how my trauma impacts my relationship with my business. And being a helper, being a therapist and a life coach and a person who tends to want to take care of others, I can see how it's playing out in my business of wanting to do it all, wanting to help everyone, and needing to set some boundaries and limits around how much I can actually do, how many people I can serve, how I can better serve myself in my business. But anyway, I hope you will check out Nicole's offerings, follow her on social media. You can check out her book if this episode resonated with you and you would like to know a little bit more about how trauma is impacting your relationship with your business. Because we all deserve to be in good relationship with all the people in our lives, including our business and ourselves and others. So, if you want to be in the loop for the podcast when new episodes are coming or when they've aired and get some insights from me in my newsletter, you can sign up to elizabethcushcoaching.com/sign up. And when you do, you will get a free PDF with journaling prompts to help you live with more ease and balance in your life. For all of you helpers, healers, empaths, intuitives, I think this is a great tool to help you recognize that the range of emotions that you feel, how often stress is in your life, and I hope you'll check them out. So sign up, elizabethcushcoaching.com/sign up and get those journaling prompts. And if you're interested in working one-on-one with me as a life coach, you can find out more about that on my website, but you can also book a free 45-minute discovery call to talk to me about coaching. If you go to elizabethcushcoaching.com, just click the link at the top. There's a box that says, "Let's talk." And that takes you right to my scheduling link. And I can't wait to talk to you. Have a terrific week, and I will see you back here on the podcast. Thanks for listening to the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional. Music by Andy Cush, sound editing by Laura Disler, and show notes by Kathy Cush. If you'd like more information about me, Biz Cush, and the resources shared today, go to awakenyourwisewoman.com.